Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? Thank you all so much for coming out to Opera Overtures. My name is Mike Bolton. I'm the Vice President of Community Initiatives at Opera Philadelphia, and we are thrilled to have you all here today for this pre-performance talk for We Shall Not Be Moved. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Don't get settled, because we all have to leave the theater after the conclusion of the talk, because they have to do some resetting of the sets and the projections. You'll see them doing some work on the projections during the conversation. But when this is over, we'll all exit out this side door and go to the little atrium or suite that's behind us, and then we'll be able to come back in and get settled into the theater. We are thrilled to have several very special guests here tonight. We have Stef Renee from WRD as our moderator for a discussion. We have Valerie Gay from Art Sanctuary, and then we have Mark Moody Joseph, who is our librettist for this opera. And making their way here is Keenan Chambers, who was one of our students in our hip opera program, which Valerie will talk a little bit about. So I'm going to get out of the way. I'll let Stephanie get started, and when Keenan comes in, we'll escort him down here.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. How are you all feeling tonight? That's a good thing. Thank you so much for coming in to be a part of the totality of what's being presented tonight, because coming in tonight, my role here as moderator is really to kind of get out of the way, ask a question, and let our experts speak. But it's just to help set a tone for you about what creativity went into presenting what you're going to see on the stage this evening. And so we're going to begin with Val Gay from Art Sanctuary to tell us a little bit about the hip opera project in schools and how that led to some of the initial creative writing that expanded to the show.
Sure. So good evening, everyone. I'm really grateful to be the executive director of Art Sanctuary, and actually I'm the second director of Art Sanctuary. Our founder, Lorene Carey, a noted author, founded the organization in 1998 in North Philly at the Church of the Advocate. And in 2007, when David Devan came to Philadelphia, to Opera Philadelphia, he was really dismayed in some respects that there was only one thing that the opera company did during February, or basically all year long, connected to the community, and that was Porgy and Bess. And that happened like once, I don't know, every 7-8 years. And so he was like, that's it. And so he started talking to different people, and several people suggested that he speak to Lorene Carey, who had started this organization called Art Sanctuary. And Art Sanctuary's mission, current mission, and an extension of the previous mission, is to use the power of Black art to transform individuals, create and build community, and foster cultural understanding. And while you don't have to be Black to like Black art, we're open to all, but using that as a situs, and also helping the young people with whom we worked in impoverished communities, and for whom there were not many opportunities or expectations granted for them. We really wanted to go into those challenging spaces. And so 10 years ago, Opera Philadelphia and Art Sanctuary started something called hip opera. You take hip hop, you take opera, you put it together, hip opera. And it started with these young people writing poems in an after-school program that then Opera Philadelphia brought in professional musicians and singers, and they basically created a song cycle. That was wonderful. And it took 5 years. It was 2 sold-out productions, and then it took 5 years to gain enough money, to raise enough money to have Hip Opera 2.0 in 2012. In 2012, we partnered again. We received a $100,000 Night Arts Challenge, and thankfully the Wincoat Foundation matched us for $100,000 to do a 2-year program with young people. That first year is when I came on board as the executive director at Art Sanctuary, succeeding Lorene, and we were embedded in 4 schools: South Philadelphia High, Esperanza Charter Academy, Linfest Mastery Charter, Linfest Campus, and Kensington Kappa, thank you. Kensington Kappa, which, by the way, despite its name is Kappa, Creative and Performing Arts, in Kensington, which is still the second poorest congressional district in the country, Kensington Kappa is a beacon, but it's not necessarily for children who are interested in the arts. Literally, the families will just beat down the door to get their kid in. I don't care if you like the arts or not, you're going to this school. And so that's where we were. So the first year, we had teaching artists, we had writing prompts, all about family, about asking questions, write a letter to a family member you've never met, writing about betrayal, writing about your ideal place. If you had no fear, what would you do? And then we turned those pieces over to Mark and Daniel Bernard Romaine. And well, I'll let them talk about it, but what we discovered during that period, I'll let Mark talk about that next part of the process. But almost simultaneously, we kind of came to a similar conclusion. We realized that we needed to change our program and go back to our roots and create an opportunity for any child in that particular school to come and express themselves and be a part of a community. And that's where Keenan comes in the next year. And so instead of being embedded in 9th grade English classes, if you have a teenager in your life, you can imagine what that might have been like. Sometimes it was absolutely wonderful and sometimes not necessarily so. But when we created an after-school program where the young people could choose to come, it changed everything for us, and it changed, I believe, everything for them. So I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thanks. Peace. Good evening. How you guys doing? I'll ask you, if you had no fear, what would you do if you had no fear? Can anybody conceive of that? Say again. You'd excel. You'd bungee jump. Great. You'd fly a 747. Anybody else? What would you do if you had no fear?
Oh, stand-up comedy.
Stand-up comedy, yes. You jump off
I would jump off the mountain without a parachute more often.
Yeah.
Wow.
Metaphorically.
Yeah. So these responses are exhilarating and not only groundbreaking, but they reveal in a way your own limits. And they reveal where you are in relationship to the defiance of those limits. So you can imagine that I received a stack of poems from young people where they were given the prompt, what would you do if you had no fear? And I was actually surprised by how those poems, in the same way that what you guys just did was speak incredibly aspirationally and without resistance, I was surprised by how the poems indicated a kind of close-in limit or world. And I really wanted to explore that with the libretto. What else was happening at the time was, many of you remember that Philadelphia had a budget crisis not so long ago, and Mayor Nutter had to borrow $30 million from the state. You guys remember this? It was like 4 years ago. What also was happening at the time was the imminent 30th anniversary of the bombing of the Move House. So those three phenomena, these poems that revealed a smaller orbit than you'd think would be articulated by young people, the closing and the shuttering, the crisis around Philadelphia's public school education system, and the 30th anniversary of the Move bombing all kind of came together in my head and prompted or catalyzed the treatment of a story that I then presented to the folks at Opera Philadelphia. And not being a resident of Philadelphia, I live in Oakland, California. I grew up in New York City. I'm a first-generation American. My folks are Haitian. I wasn't intensely or intimately close to the Philadelphia story outside of John Edgar Wideman's novel Philadelphia Fire, which is kind of part memoir and part fiction, I would say. So I was a little hesitant about presenting this idea for a story, but Opera Philadelphia really courageously, you talk about no fear, really courageously went with my idea. And the result is what you'll see on stage this evening.
And so, I was going to say, if you want to pass it down, because Keenan, I want to ask you a couple of questions that I think are really relevant to your involvement, but also how all of this impacts young people coming from your voice. What got you to South Philly High School?
Well, good evening, everyone. As you said, my name is Keenan Chambers. Going to South Philly High School wasn't a choice. My school, I went to Bach Technical High School, and they closed it down in the year 2014. And so I only was a freshman there. And since they closed that school down, it pushed me into South Philadelphia High School.
And for people who may not be familiar, South Philly was also the scene of a lot of unrest.
Yes.
So how would you describe the student climate when you forcibly had to change schools?
The climate was pretty tense because, again, we're going to a school that we're unfamiliar with, and a lot of things were already going on there that we didn't know about as students. So we weren't informed about why we're going there or what's going to happen when we get there. We were just told to go in that direction.
A lot of this all happened not long after I joined the staff at Word. And so one of the things that our listeners expressed a whole lot of concern about with the closing of schools and the redirecting of students was kind of the territorial nature of what they were scared that students would encounter coming from different neighborhoods, going to different schools,
Yes.
and not necessarily being welcomed there. So what led you to decide that writing or participating in hip opera was going to be a good outlet for you?
It was a way for me to express my view of my environment, as well as seeing and to comprehend the view of everyone else around me. For example, you may have a conversation with someone, but I feel like until you read their poetry or see their view of the world, you really wouldn't know them.
Did you have any interest in classical music prior to your involvement?
No, I didn't.
So from the student perspective, what was your expectation, perhaps, of what you were creating and how it was going to be used?
My view was just, there really wasn't a view. It was more so, I'll say, a voice that I just expected to be heard in a way that I would get acknowledged and noticed, and that people would see what we go through from a teenager in South Philadelphia High School perspective.
And so, coming into an environment that was really unfamiliar to you, not necessarily feeling welcomed in that space, and now having a vehicle through which you could be heard, was that a catalyst for you to form friendships at the school?
Yes. It allowed me and the fellow students in the program to show that we have family, that we can bond with each other, even though we don't have the same background or culture. So it kind of opened up a bridge and a gateway to a new world.
And just to expand on that a little bit, because this is a conversation we engage a lot on the air. Otis Hackney, who is the current director of education for the school district, was the principal at South Philly at the time that all this was going on, and they had a history of racially motivated attacks between student groups, a huge diverse an immigrant community as a part of that student population. And so a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of assumptions, and interaction with police that was not always positive, that was captured on a blog. There was also another program going on that tried to address the fear and the animosity that a lot of students felt in having to interact with law enforcement.
Right, and we purposefully chose that, right? So we knew that all of that was happening, and while other groups were perhaps going away from the school, to talk about courage, Alpha Philadelphia Art Sanctuary said, excuse me, that's where we need to be. Right, and our teaching artists were absolutely amazing. And the year that Keenan joined, we had lots of conversations over the summer before we got to the school with Mr. Hackney about this, Principal Hackney. So South Philadelphia High School is a gem in Philadelphia. Marian Anderson went there, Mario Lanza, Fabian, Chubby Checker, on and on and on. And there was, you went there, he went there, she went there, look at that.
Any other, I know back then it was Southern.
Right. It's
Any
such
other Southern high school grads?
amazing school. Yes, South Philadelphia High School for Girls.
Nice.
Excellent. And it was a beautiful school and with a great history that we forgot about, right? And that at the time that we went, there was no art there. There was no music there. And Mr. Hackney kept saying, I need to have evidence that you guys are here. I need to know that you're here, and our children need to know, our young people need to know that you're here. And so I remember the first time I actually saw Keenan, he was sharing and he was dancing. And it was a beautiful thing. And Keenan, can you talk about the sharing circles and the criticism and the critical give and take?
Yeah, we had sharing circles at the beginning of every lesson in class, and it was a very welcoming environment. We felt at peace, because you know how people criticize you about any and everything you do in the world. So in the sharing circle, we could do something and we would receive feedback that made us feel better, not feedback that made us feel down or depressed. So that's one good thing I loved about the sharing circles.
And I want to take that movement and that feedback and speak to Bamuthi for a minute, because if you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience your current role outside of being librettist for this particular production and how that feeds into the work that you create personally as well.
Sure. I'm a dad. That's like my principal role. I'm a father and husband. I am the Chief of Program and Pedagogy at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Okay, cool. It's like, which of my jobs do you want me to talk about? So YBCA, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, is a contemporary center in San Francisco. I live in Oakland. We have an 800-seat theater, 7,000 square foot flex space, visual arts galleries, about 25,000 square feet of visual arts galleries, and a screening room. When Steve Jobs first was announced the iPod, he would do the product launches from my theater. Bill T. Jones, who directed and choreographed this opera, is a long time commissionee, I guess, at Yerba Buena Center. The institutional role, I think, is important to talk about, because I don't know how you feel, but particularly as it relates to ecology and environment, I just believe that we are in a climactic age. We're at a climactic moment, particularly around climate change. But it's not just the ecological climate, it's also the political and the social climate that clearly are arcing in a way that I believe is unsustainable. So a question that I have to ask myself, and hopefully is evident in this work, is how do you design freedom? Like, we have really beautifully designed systems to deport people. We have incredibly designed systems to incarcerate people.
Yep.
But how do you design freedom? And maybe specifically, whose responsibility is it to think about those terms and to think about those processes? I don't believe that our federal government or even our local governments have taken on that task. I don't know if there's a ministry of inspiration. There is an American Civil Liberties Union, but they are not a governmental agency. They are a law for our collective civil liberty. So I think that arts institutions have to be, or consider themselves to be, civic institutions. Yeah. And how it is that we administer our our citizenship within the context of curation and programming has not only to do with what it is that we program, but what questions that we're asking in service of a better, more equitable tomorrow for all of us. So these are the values that I hope to leverage and model in my institutional work, and those are the underpinnings of the work that I do on stage and in my home.
Yes.
Okay? Question time, okay?
I just wanted to get, is it okay if I get one more comment from Keenan? Okay, well, so Keenan, I wanted to ask you, when we make cuts to public education, creative things are the first thing we cut. And the reality is that there are not a whole lot of folks who purposely choose creative careers, but that doesn't mean you don't benefit from creative programs in your school. So knowing that you found hip opera, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, because I know you're studying now, but how you feel when you look back on it? What do you feel you're carrying forward from your time in the program with your life where you are now?
I feel like I'm carrying, I could say, like, more of an open mind. I'm more curious on actually learning more things out in the world. From the program, I learned that everyone is different and unique, but at the same time, we're all the same. So it's like everyone has their own story, their own background. You need to hear it. You need to learn from it. So walking forward after the program, I was willing to learn new things. I was willing to get to know new ways and methods of doing things.
And let folks know where you're studying now.
Millersville University.
Sweet.
Excellent. And so we have time for 2 questions. 2 minutes. Well, ma'am, your question.
I agree, of course, with everything you said. I was teaching at the time of this move situation, and I was teaching at Parkway, which was a very innovative school. And my students actually could see in the yards the moved people, right? I forgot the year. Was it in the 70s or something?
85 was the bombing, yeah.
My question, which you percolated in me, which is a very good discussion to percolate questions. I was wondering, I don't know this opera yet. I've always been involved with the opera company. I took millions of students all the time. And I think it's a great idea to do it this way. But I'm trying to figure out, I gather you involved the students in what you wrote, right? And I'm curious, how do you tell, not tell, but sort of inform and dialogue with something that happened before these kids were born?
Right.
And it's so interesting to me to see what is the take of we experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
The kids I taught experienced it. They're still all on my Facebook, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? So I'm curious, how did they become aware of this? Was it video? Was it, what? And, I think there's still one of the movie members even still alive.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very curious how you really got the nitty-gritty to them,
And I'll just say, just as a little cap on that, there is now a historical marker that is present at the 6300 block of Osage, and the movement to initiate the historical marker was done by 11 and 12-year-olds. So clearly the passion of what happened is not lost on them, but I'll let you talk about how you incorporate the words.
It's amazing, right? Does everybody know who George Washington is?
Right.
Right. Does everybody know who Martin Luther King is?
Right.
Yeah, we manage to narrativize our histories, and those narratives are unfortunately almost always told by the winners. And the United States history in particular is really a litany of military conquests and victories, which is why texts like Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States are so vital. I think to have multiple narratives, not alternative, but multiple narratives of history. In terms of the actual minutia of making these stories plain, I think that I can't say that in the crafting of the libretto there was a kind of like reciprocity in terms of like I mostly wrote the libretto at home after my wife and kids went to sleep. So there wasn't a direct dissemination of information. There's an amazing documentary called Let the Fire Burn that I think gives a pretty great account. It's all kind of first-person accounting, mostly through footage that happened in the hearings afterwards, and also in the moment accounts from various news sources. That's how I would disseminate that information right now.
There's also a student manual.
There's now, in terms of the opera itself, there's a great student manual that bling Vanna
An education guide for your perusing.
So I know that we're out of time,
You're
and
going to tell them about touching
Yeah,
them.
but I was going to say,
you
Michael,
can do that.
if you wanted to come in and give the official
Let me grab a.
direction.
Thank you guys all so much. But just as a real quick anecdote or a follow-up to that, we have a box of these out front. There's only about 100 of them, but it's also available online. This is the study guide that all students who are attending We Shall Not Be Moved, both the final dress rehearsal, which was last week, and then the student performance, which is Wednesday. They all received this and they all use this to study up on the history behind the piece. But I can't thank you guys enough for your.
Just one final thing, because I think it's really important.
Yes.
I talked to Mark about a week ago, and I was only given one charge by the creative team, and that is to encourage all of you to enjoy the opera, but not just be a spectator of the opera. As I understand, Mark may be trademarking the following phrase: they created the opera with energetic reciprocity.
There you go.
And so the opera wants to touch you, and reach out and touch you, and it's okay for you to reach out and touch it back. So if you hear something that you love, just go ahead and say, sing! Or right? Just do it, because that is the beauty, and through that we actually are reclaiming opera for all of us. It started out as dinner theater, where I keep saying, we said to our students, Mozart was dinner theater. People brought their dinner to the theater, and if they didn't like what was on stage, it ended up on the stage. And so with that, we just really want you to enjoy and don't feel confined by a form. Just enjoy and feel. Thank you.
And thank you again. So just very quickly, if you want to learn more about this opera, the final project that our hip hopper kids did this year were oral histories of those who were engaged or involved in the events of 1985 and 2013. You can find those oral histories. Keenan is one of our subjects, talking about his transfer from Bach to Southern, and the interviews were done by our hip hopper kids. So check them out. The interviews include Ramona in Sioux Africa, Congresswoman Gims, Valerie Gay, and some other folks as well. As a reminder, the opera's 2 acts. Each act is about 50 minutes to an hour. There'll be one 20-minute intermission in between. And if you will all join me, in thanking all of our guests, but 2, right after that, we have to exit the theater back over here, and then we'll enter into the suite on the side here. But thank you guys so much for coming, and enjoy We Shall Not Be Moved.
And if you want more information about Word Radio, we have a table out in the lobby, and you can go to wordradio.com for those of you who are gadget prone. Thank you.